The German Shepherd sat motionless in the center of State Route 22, his amber eyes fixed on the approaching ambulance with unsettling intelligence. Frank Kowalski had seen plenty in his 25 years as a paramedic, but nothing like this. "What the hell?" Linda Chen muttered from the passenger seat as Frank slowed the vehicle to a crawl. The dog didn't flinch at the blaring siren or flashing lights. Instead, he rose deliberately, positioning himself directly in their path. "Maybe he's injured," Linda suggested, but Frank shook his head. The shepherd's posture was alert, purposeful, not the stance of a wounded animal. Frank leaned on the horn. The dog's ears twitched, but he held his ground, those penetrating eyes never leaving the windshield. It was as if he was trying to communicate something urgent, something that defied every rational explanation. What they discovered next would challenge everything they believed about the bond between man and animal. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Robert Bobby Harrison had always believed that some bonds transcend understanding. At 72, the retired Vietnam War dog handler lived quietly on 5 acres outside Millfield, Ohio, a town where everybody knew your business and most folks still waved from their front porches. His weathered hands, scarred from decades of working with military dogs, now spent their days gently stroking the thick coat of Max, a 5-year-old German shepherd who had wandered onto his property 2 years ago during a particularly brutal winter storm. The dog had been half-starved, his ribs showing through matted fur, but his eyes held an intelligence that reminded Robert of the working dogs he'd trained in the jungles of Southeast Asia. Unlike those dogs, Max had chosen him. No tags, no chip that worked, just a determined animal who seemed to understand that Robert needed saving as much as he did. Sarah Harrison Mitchell, Robert's 45-year-old daughter, had initially objected to the stray. A divorced nurse at Millfield General, she was already stretched thin financially, working double shifts to support her 16-year-old son Tommy while worrying about her father's increasing isolation since her mother's death 3 years ago. The last thing the family needed was veterinary bills and another mouth to feed. But Max had won them over gradually. Tommy, a quiet teenager who'd grown sullen after his parents' divorce, found himself opening up to the patient dog who seemed to listen without judgment. Sarah noticed how her father's shoulders straightened when Max was around, how the distant look that had haunted his eyes since returning from Vietnam softened when he was training the shepherd in basic commands. The farmhouse, built in 1952, sat comfortably among rolling hills dotted with oak trees, now turning brilliant shades of amber and crimson in the unseasonably warm October of 2023. Robert's VA disability check covered the basics, but the house needed repairs he couldn't afford, and Sarah knew the property taxes were becoming a burden he was too proud to discuss. Frank Kowalski, the lead paramedic now staring at the immovable German shepherd, had grown up 3 towns over. At 58, he'd seen his share of emergencies in rural Ohio, farm accidents, heart attacks, overdoses that were becoming too common even in small communities. His partner, Linda Chen, was newer to the area, but brought valuable experience from her previous career as a veterinarian before switching to emergency medicine. Dr. Elizabeth Warren at Cincinnati General Hospital, 45 minutes down the highway, had been quietly advocating for a therapy dog program despite resistance from hospital administration. She understood better than most how animals could provide comfort and healing in ways that traditional medicine sometimes couldn't reach. None of them yet understood how their lives were about to intersect in ways that would challenge everything they thought they knew about loyalty, sacrifice, and the mysterious connections that bind hearts across species. 2 weeks before the ambulance incident, Sarah noticed Max pacing the farmhouse with an urgency that made her stomach clench. The German shepherd, normally calm and obedient, had begun following Robert with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. Every morning, when Robert shuffled to the kitchen for his coffee, Max positioned himself between his master and the stairs. When Robert moved to his favorite recliner, Max planted himself at his feet, amber eyes never wavering from the old man's face. "Dad, something's wrong with Max," Sarah said during her Tuesday visit, watching the dog's restless circuit around the living room. "Maybe we should take him to the vet." Robert waved dismissively, his weathered hand reaching for the remote. "He's just getting older like me. Dogs get set in their ways." But even as he spoke, Robert felt the weight of Max's stare, as if the animal was trying to communicate something urgent that human language couldn't express. Tommy, sprawled on the couch doing homework, looked up from his algebra textbook. "Grandpa, he's been doing weird stuff all week. Yesterday I caught him moving your pills around on the kitchen counter, like he was sorting them or something." "Don't be ridiculous," Robert muttered, but a chill ran down his spine. Max had never shown interest in medication before. The dog's behavior reminded him uncomfortably of the military working dogs in Vietnam who could sense incoming mortar attacks minutes before the whistling shells reached their ears. That night, alone in his bedroom, Robert found Max sitting by his bedside at exactly 2:17 a.m., whimpering softly. When Robert tried to get up for his usual middle-of-the-night bathroom trip, Max gently blocked his path, pressing his body against Robert's legs with surprising firmness. "What's gotten into you, boy?" Robert whispered, but Max's ears remained alert, focused on sounds or scents that Robert couldn't detect. The dog's behavior triggered memories Robert had spent decades trying to suppress. Images of German shepherds and Belgian Malinois who had saved his unit countless times with their supernatural ability to detect danger before human senses could register threat. The next morning brought the first small revelation. While cleaning the front porch, Sarah discovered something that made her blood run cold. A tarnished medical alert bracelet half buried in the flower bed, its inscription barely legible: "James Morrison, diabetic, stroke risk." She found Robert in his workshop, tinkering with an old radio. "Dad, where did this come from?" She held up the bracelet, watching his face pale. Robert's hands stilled on the radio components. "Never seen it before. Probably been there for years." But Sarah wasn't fooled by his casual tone. That afternoon, she drove to the county animal shelter and spoke with Martha Hendricks, the longtime volunteer coordinator. Martha's face grew somber when Sarah described the bracelet. "Oh, honey, that belonged to Dr. Morrison. He lived in the old Victorian house about 2 miles from your dad's place. Brilliant man, used to work with animals, some kind of behavioral research. He passed away about 3 years ago. Massive stroke. Poor thing was alone for 2 days before anyone found him." Martha paused, studying Sarah's expression. "He had a German shepherd that went missing right around that time. Beautiful dog, trained for something special, though no one knew exactly what." Sarah's heart hammered as the pieces clicked into place. "What happened to the dog?" "Search parties looked for weeks. We figured he either got hit by a car or wandered off to die somewhere. Dogs sometimes do that when their owners pass. They get confused, lost." Martha's voice grew gentle. "Why do you ask?" Driving home, Sarah's mind raced. Max had appeared during that terrible winter storm exactly 2.5 years ago, shortly after Dr. Morrison's death. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. But what troubled her more was the growing certainty that Max's recent behavior wasn't random anxiety. It was purposeful, directed, almost professional. That evening, she confronted her father again. "Dad, I think Max might have belonged to Dr. Morrison, the man who died of a stroke." Robert's coffee mug trembled slightly in his hands. "So?" "So maybe Max knows something about strokes. Maybe he's trying to tell us something about your health." "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard," Robert snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. Deep down, he'd been feeling off for weeks. occasional dizziness, moments when words seemed to stick in his throat, a persistent tingling in his left arm that he'd attributed to old age and too many years of physical labor. Tommy looked up from his phone. "Grandpa, you should listen to Mom. Max has been acting super weird. Yesterday he kept bringing you your blood pressure pills even though you already took them." "Wait, what?" Sarah's nursing instincts kicked into high gear. "Dad, have you been taking extra medication?" "Of course not. The dog just... he likes to carry things around." But Robert's explanation felt hollow even to himself. The truth was, Max had been displaying an almost supernatural awareness of his daily routines, sometimes alerting him to take medication before Robert even remembered he needed it. Over the next few days, the pattern intensified. Max began positioning himself at specific locations around the property at precise times, as if following an invisible schedule. He would sit by the mailbox at 3:15 p.m., patrol the perimeter of the house at dawn and dusk, and maintain a vigilant watch from the front porch during the hours when Sarah typically visited. The financial pressure weighed heavily on Sarah's mind during this period. Her divorce settlement had been modest, and Tommy's college fund was nearly depleted by unexpected medical bills from her ex-husband's recent accident. The idea of assisted living for her father, once unthinkable, had begun creeping into her late-night worries. She'd even secretly researched facilities in the area, printing out brochures that she kept hidden in her car's glove compartment. The morning of the incident dawned unseasonably warm for October, with golden sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows as Robert attempted his normal routine. But Max had other plans. When Robert reached for his jacket to check the mailbox, Max planted himself firmly in front of the door, refusing to budge despite Robert's increasingly frustrated commands. "Move, Max, I said move!" Robert's voice carried an edge of irritation, but Max's expression remained fixed with an intensity that made Robert's skin crawl. The dog's behavior reminded him too vividly of Sargent, a German shepherd in his unit who had saved 12 men by refusing to let them enter a seemingly safe hooch that later exploded from a hidden booby trap. Around noon, Max led Robert to a specific spot in the backyard, a place where Robert had been planning to plant tomatoes next spring. The dog sat perfectly still, staring at Robert with those unsettling amber eyes. Robert felt a strange compulsion to sit down beside him, as if Max was trying to position him in a particular location for a specific purpose. It was there, 20 minutes later, that Robert felt the first unmistakable symptoms, a sudden crushing pressure in his head, his left arm going numb, words becoming impossible to form. As consciousness slipped away, his last clear thought was of Max's unwavering vigilance and the terrible understanding that this moment had been carefully orchestrated by an intelligence beyond his comprehension. Max sat beside his fallen master for exactly 30 seconds, as if calculating the severity of the situation. Then, with purpose that bordered on the supernatural, he rose and began his half-mile journey to State Route 22, where he would position himself in the path of an ambulance whose arrival seemed less like coincidence and more like destiny. Frank Kowalski had learned to trust his instincts over 2.5 decades of emergency medicine, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for the standoff with the German Shepherd blocking State Route 22. The dog's behavior defied every rational explanation. No fear, no aggression, just an unwavering determination that sent chills down Frank's spine. "We can't sit here all day," Linda said, checking her watch. "Dispatch is going to start asking questions." The radio crackled with routine chatter from other units, a reminder that protocol demanded they clear the roadway and resume their route back to base. Frank studied the animal through the windshield. Something about the dog's posture triggered a memory from his childhood, his grandfather's old hunting dog, Rex, who had once refused to let the family enter their cabin until they discovered a gas leak that could have killed them all. "Linda, I've got a crazy idea. What if this dog isn't just being stubborn? What if he's trying to tell us something? You think a dog flagged down an ambulance? Linda's veterinary background made her skeptical of anthropomorphizing animal behavior, yet she couldn't deny the intelligence in the shepherd's eyes. Even if that were possible, dogs don't understand emergency vehicles. Frank shifted into park and opened his door slowly. The German shepherd immediately rose to his feet but didn't retreat. Instead, he took several deliberate steps toward the ambulance, then stopped and looked back over his shoulder, a gesture so human-like that both paramedics felt their breath catch. "He wants us to follow him," Frank said, his voice barely above a whisper. Linda grabbed the portable defibrillator and emergency kit without fully understanding why. Training had taught her to trust her partner's judgment, and something in Frank's tone convinced her that skepticism could wait. They followed the dog off the asphalt onto a narrow dirt path that wound between overgrown fields toward a cluster of oak trees. The shepherd moved with purpose, occasionally pausing to ensure the humans were keeping pace. His gait was steady, urgent, but not panicked, the behavior of an animal with a specific destination in mind. As they crested a small hill, Linda spotted the farmhouse in the distance, its white clapboard siding, weathered but well-maintained. "There," Frank pointed toward a figure lying motionless near a vegetable garden. "Jesus Christ, there's someone down." The elderly man lay on his side in the damp earth, his breathing shallow and irregular. Frank's experienced eye immediately recognized the signs: left side facial droop, right arm drawn up against his chest, the telltale positioning of a stroke victim. The man's eyes were open but unfocused, tracking movement without apparent recognition. "Sir, can you hear me?" Frank knelt beside the victim while Linda checked vital signs. "We're paramedics. You're going to be okay." The man's lips moved but produced only unintelligible sounds. Linda noted the time on her watch. Critical information for stroke protocol. Every minute counted in determining treatment options once they reached the hospital. "BP 180 over 110, pulse thready and irregular," Linda reported while establishing IV access. "Definitely looks like CVA. How long has he been down?" The German shepherd positioned himself near the man's head, whimpering softly but maintaining a protective stance. Frank noticed something remarkable. The dog's behavior wasn't frantic or distressed like most pets when their owners were injured. Instead, he seemed almost relieved, as if his mission had been accomplished. "Good boy," Frank murmured while preparing the stretcher. "You did good." As they loaded the patient into the ambulance, Frank discovered a wallet in the man's shirt pocket. The driver's license identified him as Robert Harrison, age 72, with an address matching the nearby farmhouse. Linda found emergency contact information listing Sarah Harrison Mitchell as his daughter. The 20-minute transport to Cincinnati General Hospital passed in controlled urgency. Robert's condition remained stable but serious, his Glasgow coma scale hovering around 12, responsive but clearly neurologically compromised. Linda called ahead to alert the stroke team, while Frank navigated the rural highways with practiced efficiency. What struck both paramedics was the German shepherd's behavior during the entire incident. Unlike most pets who became hysterical when separated from injured owners, this dog had watched their departure with what could only be described as satisfaction. He'd accomplished exactly what he'd set out to do. "In 25 years, I've never seen anything like that," Frank said as they pulled into the hospital bay. "It's like that dog planned the whole thing." Linda nodded, still processing what they'd witnessed. "The timing was perfect. If we'd been 5 minutes later taking that route, or if the dog hadn't stopped us—" She didn't finish the sentence, but both understood the implications. Dr. Elizabeth Warren met them at the emergency department doors, her experienced hands already reaching for the patient chart. As the stroke team mobilized around Robert Harrison, Frank pulled her aside to explain the unusual circumstances of their call. You're telling me a dog flagged down your ambulance? Dr. Warren's eyebrows rose skeptically. I know how it sounds, but that's exactly what happened. The animal was sitting in the middle of State Route 22 like he was waiting for us specifically. Doctor. Warren had seen enough medical emergencies to know that unusual circumstances often surrounded critical cases, but this story challenged her scientific training. Still, the important thing was getting Robert Harrison the care he needed within the critical treatment window. The stroke team worked with mechanical precision, CT scan to rule out hemorrhage, blood work to check clotting factors, preparation for potential thrombolytic therapy. The preliminary diagnosis confirmed Frank's field assessment, acute ischemic stroke affecting the left middle cerebral artery territory. Meanwhile, Linda used the hospital phone to contact Sarah Harrison Mitchell. The conversation was difficult, explaining to a daughter that her father had suffered a stroke, found by pure chance when a dog had stopped their ambulance. Sarah's shocked silence stretched long enough that Linda worried the connection had been lost. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Sarah finally managed. Is he? Will he be okay? The doctors are doing everything they can, Linda replied, falling back on the careful language of medical professionals. The good news is we found him quickly. That's crucial with stroke patients. What Linda didn't mention was the nagging certainty that they hadn't found Robert Harrison by chance at all. The German Shepherd's behavior suggested planning, intelligence, and purpose that defied conventional understanding of animal cognition. The dog had somehow known exactly when and where to position himself to intercept their ambulance. As the medical team worked to stabilize Robert, Frank found himself returning to the unusual circumstances of the call. He'd responded to thousands of emergencies over his career, but none that felt quite so orchestrated. The dog's behavior reminded him of stories his grandfather used to tell about animals sensing earthquakes or storms long before humans detected any signs of danger. Doctor. Warren emerged from the treatment room with an update. We've administered TPA, the clot-busting medication. His vital signs are stable, and we're seeing some early signs of improvement. The next 24 hours will be critical, but finding him as quickly as we did significantly improved his chances. Frank nodded, but his mind kept returning to the German Shepherd sitting calmly in the middle of State Route 22, amber eyes fixed on their approaching ambulance with unmistakable intelligence. Whatever had happened today challenged everything he thought he knew about the boundaries between human and animal understanding. The initial crisis had passed, but Frank sensed they were only at the beginning of a story that would force everyone involved to reconsider their assumptions about loyalty, intelligence, and the mysterious bonds that sometimes transcend the limitations of species. Sarah Harrison Mitchell arrived at Cincinnati General Hospital with her heart hammering against her ribs and her son Tommy close behind. The 20-minute drive had felt like hours, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios while Tommy sat in stunned silence, occasionally asking questions she couldn't answer. The emergency department's fluorescent lighting seemed harsh and unforgiving as they approached the reception desk. My father, Robert Harrison, he was brought in about an hour ago, Sarah managed, her nursing background helping her maintain composure despite the circumstances. Stroke patient. The receptionist's fingers clicked across her keyboard. Room 304. Dr. Warren is with him now. Take the elevator to the 3rd floor. Turn right. Sarah knew the layout of Cincinnati General well enough. She'd worked here briefly during nursing school before choosing the smaller hospital in Millfield. The familiar smell of antiseptic and floor wax brought back memories of long shifts and difficult cases, but none of that experience had prepared her for seeing her father as the patient. Doctor. Warren met them outside Robert's room, her expression professionally neutral but not unkind. Ms. Harrison Mitchell, I'm Dr. Warren. Your father has suffered what we call an acute ischemic stroke. The good news is that we were able to administer medication within the critical window, thanks to how quickly he was found. How quickly? Sarah's nursing training kicked in, her mind cataloging the technical details that would help her understand the prognosis. The paramedics estimated he'd been down less than 30 minutes when they found him. That's remarkable for someone living alone in a rural area. Dr. Warren paused, studying Sarah's face. They mentioned some unusual circumstances about how they located him. Tommy stepped forward, his teenage awkwardness replaced by genuine concern. Is Grandpa going to be okay? It's too early to know the full extent of the damage, but his vital signs are stable. He's conscious and responsive, though his speech is still affected. The next 24 to 48 hours will tell us more about his recovery potential. Sarah felt her knees weaken with relief, but the doctor's mention of unusual circumstances nagged at her. What did you mean about how they found him? Dr. Warren's expression grew puzzled. According to the paramedics, a dog, apparently your father's dog, actually stopped their ambulance on the road and led them to your father. I've never heard of anything quite like it. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Max. She'd been so focused on rushing to the hospital that she hadn't even thought about what had happened to Max. Where is he now? The dog, I mean. I assume he's still at your father's property. The paramedics couldn't bring him here, obviously. Sarah's mind reeled as she processed the implications. Max had somehow known that Robert was in trouble and had found a way to get help. The behavior she'd witnessed over the past 2 weeks suddenly made perfect sense. Max hadn't been acting strangely out of anxiety. He'd been preparing for this moment. They entered Robert's room quietly. Her father lay propped up in the hospital bed, his face pale but alert. The left side of his mouth drooped slightly, and when he tried to speak, the words came out slurred but understandable. Sarah? Tommy? Robert's eyes filled with tears as he reached out with his unaffected right hand. Max, where's Max? He's okay, Dad. He's the one who saved you. Sarah took her father's hand, noting the strength of his grip, a good sign. The paramedic said he stopped their ambulance somehow. Robert's eyes widened, and for a moment his speech cleared. Smart boy. Always was. Special. He paused, struggling with the words. Like the dogs. In Vietnam. Tommy pulled a chair close to the bed. Grandpa, tell us about the dogs in Vietnam. But Robert had already drifted into the exhausted sleep that often followed major medical events. Sarah adjusted his blanket and settled into the uncomfortable visitor's chair, her mind churning with questions and guilt. How had she missed the signs? How long had Max been trying to warn them? Over the next several hours, a steady stream of visitors arrived. Frank Kowalski stopped by during his break, still shaking his head over the day's events. In all my years doing this job, I've never seen anything like what that dog did today. He saved your father's life, no question about it. Linda Chen arrived with Frank, her veterinary background making her particularly interested in Max's behavior. Has he ever shown signs of medical alerting before? Some dogs are naturally sensitive to changes in their owner's condition. Sarah thought back over the past few weeks, remembering incidents she'd dismissed as quirks. He'd been acting protective lately, staying close to Dad, but I thought it was just, I don't know, normal dog behavior. There's nothing normal about what happened today, Frank said firmly. That dog positioned himself exactly where he needed to be to intercept our ambulance. The timing was perfect, almost like he knew our route. Word of the incident had already begun spreading through the small hospital staff. Nurses and orderlies found excuses to walk past Robert's room, curious about the patient whose dog had supposedly flagged down an ambulance. Some were skeptical, attributing the story to the stress and confusion that often surrounded emergency situations. Others, particularly those who owned pets, found the account entirely believable. Dr. Warren returned that evening with Robert's test results. The CT scan shows some areas of concern, but the damage appears to be limited. His speech should continue to improve over the next few days, and there's no reason to expect significant long-term impairment if he follows through with rehabilitation. "What about going home?" Sarah asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. The nursing home brochures hidden in her car suddenly seemed prophetic rather than preparatory. That will depend on his progress over the next few days. He'll need physical therapy, speech therapy, and close monitoring of his medications. Do you have support systems in place? Sarah hesitated. The truth was that her father's care needs would likely exceed what she could provide while working full-time. The financial pressure of extended care weighed heavily on her mind, but voicing those concerns felt like a betrayal, while Robert lay vulnerable in the hospital bed. "We'll figure it out," Tommy said quietly, surprising both women. "Grandpa took care of us after the divorce. Now it's our turn." That night, Sarah drove out to her father's farmhouse to check on Max and gather some personal items for Robert's hospital stay. The house felt eerily quiet without her father's presence, but Max was waiting on the front porch as if he'd been expecting her. The German Shepherd's behavior was markedly different from the anxiety-driven restlessness of recent weeks. He seemed calm, almost satisfied, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. When Sarah opened the front door, Max trotted inside and went directly to Robert's bedroom, where he lay down beside the bed in his usual spot. "You did good, boy," Sarah whispered, kneeling to stroke his thick coat. "You saved him." Max's amber eyes met hers with an intelligence that made her shiver. For the first time, she truly understood that this was no ordinary pet. Whatever Max's background, and she was increasingly certain it connected to the late Dr. Morrison, he possessed abilities that defied conventional understanding. As she gathered Robert's medications from the kitchen counter, Sarah made a disturbing discovery. Several of the pill bottles were empty, though according to the prescription dates, they should have contained at least a week's worth of medication. The implications were troubling. Had her father been forgetting to take his pills? Or worse, had he been deliberately avoiding them? She found her answer in the trash can under the kitchen sink. Dozens of pills lay scattered among the garbage, clearly dumped from their containers. But the discovery that made her blood run cold was the condition of the medications. Many were visibly deteriorated, their expiration dates showing they were more than a year old. Robert had been taking expired medications for months, possibly explaining the symptoms that had led to his stroke. But why hadn't he mentioned that his prescriptions needed refilling? The answer came to her with painful clarity: pride, stubbornness, and the financial pressure he'd been too proud to admit. The nursing home brochures hidden in her car suddenly felt like an obscene betrayal. While she'd been planning to place her father in institutional care, he'd been suffering in silence, too proud to ask for help with basic necessities like current medications. Max appeared in the doorway, watching her with those unsettling amber eyes. Sarah had the uncomfortable feeling that the dog understood exactly what she'd discovered and was judging her response. The weight of her father's trust, her own guilt, and the growing realization of Max's extraordinary abilities converged into a moment of absolute clarity. Her father was coming home, whatever it took. The nursing home brochures would go in the trash where they belonged, and she would find a way to provide the care he needed. Max had fulfilled his part of the bargain by saving Robert's life. Now it was her turn to prove worthy of the loyalty that had been freely given. The confrontation began at 6:30 a.m. on Robert's third day in the hospital when Dr. Warren discovered Max sitting calmly in the visitor's lounge on the third floor. Security footage later revealed that the German Shepherd had somehow entered through a service entrance during the night shift change, navigating 4 separate secured doors and 2 flights of stairs to reach the cardiac wing. "How did he get in here?" Nurse Patricia Williams demanded, her voice sharp with authority and barely concealed panic. Animals are strictly prohibited in patient areas. This is a massive violation of health department regulations. Frank Kowalski, who had stopped by to check on Robert during his morning break, found himself defending the dog he'd only known for 3 days. "Pat, this isn't just any animal. This dog saved a man's life. Maybe we should cut him some slack." "I don't care if he performed brain surgery," Patricia shot back, her 20-year tenure at Cincinnati General making her inflexible on policy matters. "He cannot be here, period." Dr. Warren emerged from Robert's room with Sarah close behind, both women drawn by the raised voices. Max remained seated in the lounge, his amber eyes tracking the conversation with an intelligence that made several staff members visibly uncomfortable. "There's no way he could have gotten up here on his own," Patricia continued, scanning the faces around her. "Someone had to let him in. Someone violated hospital protocol. And I want to know who." Security Chief Marcus Thompson arrived with 2 guards, his expression grim. "Dr. Warren, I've reviewed the footage. This animal entered the building at 2:47 a.m. through the emergency department loading dock. Nobody let him in. The door was propped open by a delivery truck. He walked through like he knew exactly where he was going." The revelation sent murmurs through the gathering crowd of staff and early visitors. Max's navigation of the hospital's complex layout without guidance suggested either incredible luck or an understanding of building design that seemed impossible for an animal. "I want him removed immediately," Patricia declared, but her authority was challenged by an unexpected voice. "No." Robert Harrison stood in his doorway, leaning heavily on a walker but speaking with unmistakable determination. His speech was still slightly slurred from the stroke, but his message was clear. "Max stays." Dr. Warren moved quickly to support her patient. "Mr. Harrison, you shouldn't be up without assistance." "I'm fine," Robert insisted, though his trembling hands betrayed the effort required to remain standing. "That dog, he saved my life." "I won't have him thrown out like garbage." Tommy pushed past the adults to kneel beside Max, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck. "He's not hurting anybody. Why can't he just stay for a little while?" The confrontation escalated when hospital administrator Margaret Foster arrived, summoned by Patricia's urgent page. Foster's reputation for strict adherence to policy was legendary among staff, and her expression left no doubt about her position on animals in the hospital. "This situation ends now," Foster announced, her voice cutting through the competing conversations. "Security will escort this animal off the premises immediately. Any staff member who interferes will face disciplinary action." Sarah felt her composure cracking. "Mrs. Foster, with all due respect, this dog saved my father's life. Surely there's some accommodation." "There are no accommodations for health code violations," Foster interrupted. "I don't care if this animal performed miracles. He cannot remain in this hospital." The situation reached a breaking point when Max, as if sensing the escalating tension, rose and walked calmly to Robert's side. The elderly man's face lit up with the first genuine smile anyone had seen since his stroke, and he reached down to stroke the dog's head with his unsteady hand. "Good boy," Robert whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I knew you'd find me." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of local news reporter Jennifer Martinez and her cameraman, drawn by anonymous tips about the miracle dog story. The presence of media transformed the hospital corridor into a battlefield over public relations versus policy enforcement. "Mr. Harrison," Jennifer called out, her microphone already recording, "can you tell us about how your dog saved your life?" Margaret Foster's face darkened as she realized the situation was spiraling beyond her control. Media attention would bring scrutiny she couldn't afford, particularly given the hospital's recent struggles with state health inspectors. Dr. Warren saw an opportunity in the chaos. Mrs. Foster, perhaps we could discuss this privately? I think there might be options we haven't considered. The only option is immediate removal of this animal, Foster replied, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. The presence of cameras and the growing crowd of supporters had clearly rattled her. Frank Kowalski stepped forward, his paramedic uniform lending authority to his words. "Ma'am, I've been in emergency medicine for 25 years. I've never seen anything like what this dog did." He positioned himself to intercept our ambulance with surgical precision. If that's not worth bending a few rules, I don't know what is. The crowd of supporters continued to grow as word spread through the hospital. Nurses who had heard the story, orderlies who had seen Max's calm behavior, and visitors who were touched by the display of loyalty all gathered to witness the confrontation. Linda Chen arrived with devastating news that changed everything. "Mrs. Foster, I just spoke with the health department. They want to investigate the animal incident at the hospital. A formal complaint has been filed." Foster's political instincts kicked in as she realized the potential consequences. A health department investigation could result in fines, public censure, and damage to the hospital's reputation that would far exceed any positive publicity from the feel-good story. "Everyone back to work," Foster ordered, but her authority was undermined by the growing media presence and public interest. Local residents had begun arriving after hearing radio reports of the story, creating a circus atmosphere that hospital security was ill-equipped to handle. The crisis deepened when Robert's condition suddenly deteriorated. The stress of the confrontation, combined with his recent stroke, caused his blood pressure to spike dangerously. Dr. Warren rushed him back to his room while nurses cleared the area of non-essential personnel. "This is exactly why we have these policies," Patricia Williams declared as medical staff worked to stabilize Robert. "Emotional stress is the last thing a stroke patient needs." But Sarah noticed something crucial that everyone else missed. As Robert's vital signs fluctuated wildly, Max positioned himself at the foot of the hospital bed and began a low, rhythmic whimpering that seemed to have an immediate calming effect. Robert's blood pressure reading, which had spiked to dangerous levels, began dropping toward normal ranges. Dr. Warren, monitoring the changes on her tablet, paused in confusion. "That's unusual. His BP just dropped 15 points in 2 minutes." "It's Max," Sarah said quietly. "Watch him." The German shepherd continued his soft vocalizations, never taking his eyes off Robert's face. The old man's breathing became more regular, his color improved, and his vital signs stabilized in a way that seemed to defy medical explanation. "Coincidence?" Patricia Williams muttered, but her voice lacked conviction. Dr. Warren, however, was intrigued. Her long-standing interest in therapy animal programs made her more receptive to unconventional explanations. "Actually, there's growing research about the physiological effects of human-animal interaction. Decreased blood pressure, lower cortisol levels, improved cardiac function." The revelation that Max's presence had actually stabilized Robert's condition created a new dynamic in the confrontation. Margaret Foster found herself trapped between rigid policy enforcement and undeniable evidence that the dog was providing therapeutic benefit to a patient. Tommy, who had been quietly observing from the corner, stepped forward with teenage logic that cut through the adult complications. "Why don't you just make Max an official therapy dog? Then he wouldn't be breaking any rules." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Foster's face cycled through expressions of annoyance, consideration, and calculation as she weighed the political implications. "Therapy animals require extensive training and certification," Foster said slowly. "There are background checks, health screenings, behavioral evaluations. The process takes months." "Then start the process," Dr. Warren said firmly. "In the meantime, this dog has demonstrated clear therapeutic value for this specific patient. I'm recommending he be allowed to remain as part of Mr. Harrison's treatment plan. The standoff continued as Foster realized she was facing not just a policy violation, but a public relations nightmare that could define her tenure as hospital administrator. The choice between enforcing regulations and embracing a story that could bring positive attention to Cincinnati General would determine not just Max's fate, but the future of human-animal relationships at the hospital. Outside Robert's room, the German shepherd waited patiently, as if he understood that his destiny was being decided by forces beyond his control, but that his unwavering loyalty had already accomplished what it needed to accomplish. The devastating phone call came at 7:23 p.m., just as the media circus surrounding Max had begun to die down. Sarah answered her cell phone in the hospital corridor, expecting another well-wisher or curious reporter, but instead heard the cold, professional voice of Patricia Williams delivering news that would shatter everything they had fought for. Miss Harrison Mitchell, this is Nurse Williams. I need you to come to the administration office immediately. There's been a development regarding your father's case. Sarah's stomach clenched with dread as she made her way through the hospital's maze of corridors. Tommy walked beside her, sensing his mother's anxiety, but afraid to ask questions. Max, who had been lying peacefully beside Robert's bed, suddenly raised his head with an alertness that had become familiar and terrifying. Margaret Foster waited in her office with a folder thick with documents and the expression that promised no mercy. Beside her sat a stern-faced woman in an expensive business suit who introduced herself as Janet Morrison, attorney for the Ohio Department of Health. Miss Harrison Mitchell, please sit down, Foster began, her earlier uncertainty replaced by bureaucratic efficiency. We've completed our investigation into the animal incident, and I'm afraid the findings are quite serious. Janet Morrison opened her briefcase and withdrew a legal document bearing official state seals. The Department of Health has concluded that allowing an uncertified animal to remain in patient care areas constitutes a willful violation of state health codes. The financial penalties could reach $50,000, and the hospital's operating license is now under review. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. What does that mean for my father? It means, Foster continued with barely concealed satisfaction, that if this animal is not removed from the premises within the next hour, your father's insurance coverage will be terminated. Blue Cross has already been notified of the health code violations, and they've indicated they cannot cover treatment at a non-compliant facility. The devastating reality hit Sarah like a physical blow. Robert's stroke treatment, the medications, the rehabilitation, the round-the-clock monitoring, cost thousands of dollars per day. Without insurance coverage, the family would face financial ruin within a week. You're holding my father's medical care hostage over a dog? Sarah's voice rose with disbelief and fury. We're enforcing health regulations that exist to protect all patients, Foster replied coldly. Your emotional attachment to this animal doesn't supersede the safety of hundreds of other people. Tommy stepped forward, his teenage composure cracking. This is bullshit. Max didn't hurt anybody. He saved Grandpa's life. Language, young man, Janet Morrison warned, and this animal's previous actions don't excuse current violations. The law is clear and non-negotiable. Sarah's nursing background helped her understand the impossible position they were facing. Hospitals operated under strict regulatory oversight, and violations could indeed trigger insurance problems that would affect not just Robert, but every patient in the facility. How long do we have? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Animal control has been notified, Foster announced. They'll arrive at 8:30 p.m. to remove the dog. If you attempt to interfere, you'll be arrested for trespassing and obstruction. The cruelty of the timing was deliberate. With less than an hour's notice, Sarah had no opportunity to find alternative arrangements or mount any kind of appeal. The decision was designed to be final and immediate. Racing back to Robert's room, Sarah found her father sitting up in bed, somehow sensing that disaster was approaching. Max lay beside him, the dog's usual calm replaced by a restlessness that mirrored the family's growing panic. "Dad, I have to tell you something terrible," Sarah began, but Robert raised his hand to stop her. "They're taking Max away," he said, his stroke-affected speech making the words sound even more heartbreaking. "I can see it in your face. The hospital says they'll cut off your insurance if Max stays. We don't have a choice." Robert's eyes filled with tears as he reached down to stroke Max's head one final time. "I'm sorry, boy. I'm so sorry." The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of anguish and preparation. Word spread quickly through the hospital staff, many of whom had become invested in the story of the heroic dog. Nurses who had initially supported the strict policy enforcement now found themselves questioning the humanity of separating a man from the animal that had saved his life. Dr. Warren arrived with barely concealed anger at the administration's decision. "This is medically contraindicated," she told Sarah privately. "Your father's blood pressure has been stable only when the dog is present. Removing Max could trigger another stroke." "Then stop them," Tommy pleaded. "You're a doctor. Can't you override this somehow?" "I wish I could, but hospital administrators control policy, not physicians. My medical opinion carries no weight against state health regulations." Frank Kowalski and Linda Chen arrived as the final minutes ticked away, both paramedics visibly distressed by the turn of events. "This is wrong," Frank said bluntly. "That dog performed a medical miracle, and now he's being punished for it." Animal Control Officer Derek Murphy arrived precisely at 8:30 p.m. with a catch pole and transport cage that looked more appropriate for dangerous strays than for a dog who had saved a human life. His apologetic demeanor suggested he understood the injustice of his mission, but was powerless to change it. "I'm sorry, folks. I know this is hard, but I have my orders." Max seemed to understand what was happening. As Officer Murphy approached with the catch-pole, the German Shepherd moved closer to Robert's bed, his amber eyes fixed on his master's face with an expression of profound confusion and betrayal. "It's okay, boy," Robert whispered, his voice breaking. "You did everything right. This isn't your fault." The scene that followed would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. Max didn't resist, as the catch-pole was placed around his neck, but his eyes never left Robert's face. The dog's complete trust and acceptance of his fate made the forced separation even more heartbreaking. As Max was led toward the door, he turned back once, whimpering softly, not in fear, but in what sounded like a farewell. Robert tried to get out of bed to follow, but his weakened condition and the intervention of nursing staff prevented him from standing. "No!" Robert's anguished cry echoed through the corridor as Max disappeared around the corner. "Bring him back, please." The immediate medical consequences were exactly what Dr. Warren had predicted. Robert's blood pressure spiked to dangerous levels, his heart rate became irregular, and for several terrifying minutes the medical team feared he was having another stroke. "Get me 10 milligilers of lisinopril stat," Dr. Warren ordered as nurses worked to stabilize Robert's vital signs. "And someone find out where they took that dog. We may need to reverse this decision immediately." But it was too late. Animal control regulations required that Max be taken to the county facility pending determination of his ultimate fate. The bureaucratic process that had separated him from Robert would take days or weeks to reverse, assuming it could be reversed at all. Sarah sat beside her father's bed as he sobbed with a grief that seemed to encompass not just the loss of Max, but the cruel unfairness of a system that punished loyalty and punished love. The man who had survived a stroke was now being broken by institutional indifference. "They took my boy," Robert whispered repeatedly. "They took my boy." Outside, a crowd of supporters had gathered in the hospital parking lot, drawn by social media posts and news reports about the forced separation. Signs reading, "Bring back Max" and "Heroes don't belong in cages" appeared as public outrage began building against the hospital's decision. The irony was devastating. Max had saved Robert's life, only to become the instrument of his emotional destruction. The very institution that was supposed to heal had become the source of a wound that might never recover. Tommy sat in the corner of the room, tears streaming down his face as he watched his grandfather's spirit being crushed by forces beyond anyone's control. The teenager who had grown from sullen to caring through his relationship with Max now faced the reality that sometimes love wasn't enough to overcome bureaucratic cruelty. As visiting hours ended and the hospital settled into nighttime routine, Robert stared at the empty space where Max had lain, his heart monitor showing the irregular rhythm of a man whose will to live had been shattered along with his trust in human compassion. The revelation that would shatter everyone's understanding of the situation came at 6:15 a.m. the following morning, delivered by an unlikely messenger. Dr. James Morrison III, a distinguished veterinary neurologist from Ohio State University, arrived at Cincinnati General Hospital carrying a leather briefcase and wearing an expression of barely controlled excitement. "I need to speak with someone about the German Shepherd that was removed from this facility last night," he told the reception desk with an urgency that immediately captured attention. "That dog belonged to my father." Sarah, who had spent the night in Robert's room watching her father's condition deteriorate, was summoned to meet with Dr. Morrison in the family conference room. Tommy accompanied her, both of them exhausted and emotionally drained from the previous evening's trauma. "Doctor." Morrison opened his briefcase and withdrew a collection of research papers, photographs, and official documents that would transform their understanding of Max's extraordinary abilities. "My father was Dr. James Morrison II, a pioneering researcher in animal behavioral medicine. He spent the last decade of his life developing protocols for training dogs to detect medical emergencies." Sarah's breath caught as she recognized the name from the medical alert bracelet they'd found in Robert's yard. "Your father died of a stroke 3 years ago." "Yes, and Max was his most successful subject." Dr. Morrison spread photographs across the conference table showing Max as a younger dog working with sophisticated monitoring equipment in a laboratory setting. "My father trained Max to detect the biochemical changes that occur before strokes, heart attacks, and diabetic episodes. The dog can identify these conditions 15 to 45 minutes before symptoms become apparent to humans." Tommy leaned forward, studying the images with growing amazement. "You mean Max really can predict when someone's going to get sick?" "Not predict, detect. There are measurable changes in human scent, body temperature, and behavior that occur before major medical events. Most dogs ignore these subtle signals, but Max was trained to recognize them as emergency indicators." Dr. Morrison's revelation explained everything. Max's restless behavior in the weeks before Robert's stroke, his positioning of Robert in specific locations, his uncanny ability to intercept the ambulance at precisely the right moment. The dog hadn't been acting on instinct or luck. He'd been following sophisticated medical training. "Why didn't anyone know about this?" Sarah demanded. "When Max showed up at our house, he had no identification, no records. After my father's death, the research program was discontinued. The university considered Max to be surplus equipment and planned to euthanize him." Dr. Morrison's voice grew heavy with regret. "I was traveling abroad when it happened. By the time I returned and learned what had occurred, Max had disappeared from the facility." The moral implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. The university had planned to kill Max simply because his trainer had died, treating a living being with extraordinary abilities as disposable property. Max's escape and eventual arrival at Robert's farm now seemed less like chance and more like destiny. "There's more," Dr. Morrison continued, withdrawing additional documents. My father's research was funded by the Department of Veterans Affairs. The program was specifically designed to help military veterans with PTSD and other service-related conditions. Max wasn't just trained to detect medical emergencies, he was trained to work with former soldiers. The revelation that Max had been specifically designed to help veterans like Robert added another layer of tragedy to their forced separation. The dog who had found his perfect match in a lonely Vietnam veteran was now imprisoned in an animal control facility, separated from the very person his training had prepared him to serve. Dr. Morrison reached into his briefcase and withdrew a document that would change everything. This is Max's official certification as a medical alert service animal, signed by both the American Kennel Club and the International Association of Assistance Dog Partners. Under federal law, he has the right to accompany his handler in any public facility, including hospitals. Sarah stared at the document, her nursing background helping her understand the legal implications. You mean the hospital violated federal disability law by removing him? Exactly. The Americans with Disabilities Act specifically protects service animals, regardless of state health codes. Cincinnati General Hospital has committed a federal civil rights violation by forcibly separating a certified service animal from his handler. The legal ramifications were staggering. The hospital that had justified Max's removal based on health regulations had actually violated federal law in the process. Margaret Foster's heavy-handed enforcement of state policies had exposed the institution to lawsuits, federal investigations, and civil rights violations far more serious than any health code infractions. Tommy jumped up from his chair, teenage excitement overriding exhaustion. So we can get Max back, right now? Legally? Yes. But there's something else you need to understand. Dr. Morrison's expression grew solemn. Max's training was so specific, so intensive, that he can't be retrained for different work. If he's separated from active service, he'll need to be euthanized. The brutal reality hit them with devastating force. Max wasn't just a pet who could be rehomed if circumstances changed. He was a highly specialized medical instrument whose purpose was saving lives. Without that purpose, his extraordinary abilities would become a burden that made normal pet life impossible. The university will want him back, Dr. Morrison continued. Now that we know he's alive and operational, the research program will likely be reinstated. Max represents millions of dollars in training and development. Sarah felt her world tilting as she realized the scope of forces aligning against their family. The hospital wanted Max gone to avoid regulatory problems. The university wanted him back as valuable research property, and animal control was simply following bureaucratic procedures. Meanwhile, Robert was dying of heartbreak in a hospital room upstairs. What if we refuse to give him up? Sarah asked desperately. What if we keep Max as Robert's service animal? Dr. Morrison's expression grew sympathetic but realistic. Your father would need to be certified as disabled and requiring assistance. The process takes months, requires extensive medical documentation, and costs thousands of dollars. Even then, the university could claim ownership of Max as university property. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Warren's urgent entry into the conference room. Sarah, you need to come quickly. Your father's condition has deteriorated significantly. His blood pressure is spiking again, and he's becoming increasingly agitated. Racing back to Robert's room, they found the elderly veteran in severe distress, his vital signs fluctuating wildly as he called repeatedly for Max. The medical team had administered sedatives, but Robert's body seemed to be rejecting treatment in the absence of the calming presence that had stabilized him for days. This is what I was afraid of, Dr. Warren said privately to Sarah. The psychological trauma of losing Max is creating physical symptoms that could trigger another stroke. Dr. Morrison observed Robert's condition with the clinical eye of a researcher who understood the human-animal bond in medical terms. The attachment isn't just emotional, it's physiological. Max's presence regulates your father's stress hormones, blood pressure, and cardiac function. Separating them is like removing life support equipment. Standing beside Robert's bed, watching her father suffer from a broken heart, Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of their lives. Dr. Morrison, what would it take to get Max certified as my father's official service animal? Legal action against the hospital for ADA violations, medical certification of your father's disability status, and a court order for Max's immediate return. It would be expensive, time-consuming, and would require taking on both the hospital administration and the university. Tommy stepped forward with the determination that had sustained their family through crisis after crisis. Then that's what we'll do. Grandpa served his country, and Max served his purpose. They deserve better than this. But even as they planned their legal strategy, the clock was ticking toward a deadline that would make all their efforts meaningless. Animal control policies required that unclaimed animals be euthanized after 72 hours. Max had less than 48 hours before the bureaucratic machinery would eliminate him forever, regardless of legal arguments or emotional appeals. The battle for Max's life had become a race against time, with federal law, university property rights, hospital policies, and animal control regulations creating a legal maze that might be impossible to navigate before the deadline arrived. The dog who had saved Robert's life now needed saving himself, and the very institutions that should have protected him had become the greatest threats to his survival. The phone call that changed everything came at 11:47 a.m. on what everyone believed would be Max's final day. Sarah was meeting with civil rights attorney Michael Chen, Linda's brother, when his secretary burst into the conference room with news that would transform their desperate legal battle into something far more significant. Mr. Chen, Channel 7 is on line 1. They say it's urgent about the Harrison case. Michael Chen had taken the case pro bono after his sister Linda described the injustice of Max's situation. As a specialist in disability rights law, he understood the federal implications of the hospital's actions, but he also knew that legal processes moved slowly while Max's 72-hour deadline approached with terrifying speed. "This is Michael Chen," he answered, putting the call on speaker so Sarah could hear. "Mr. Chen, this is Jennifer Martinez from Channel 7 News. We've been investigating the Max Harrison story, and we've uncovered information that your clients need to know immediately." Sarah's heart pounded as she waited for news that might save or doom the dog who had become the center of their family's universe. "We've discovered that Margaret Foster, the hospital administrator who ordered Max's removal, has a significant conflict of interest. Her husband, David Foster, is a major shareholder in Midwest Animal Control Services, the company that currently holds Max and stands to profit from housing him indefinitely." The revelation hit the room like a bombshell. The woman who had claimed to be enforcing health regulations for the public good was actually creating business for her family's financial benefit. Every day Max remained in the animal control facility generated revenue for the Foster family. "There's more," Jennifer continued. "We've also learned that Cincinnati General Hospital has been in negotiations for months to establish their own therapy animal program. Margaret Foster has been blocking those efforts, claiming regulatory concerns, while simultaneously steering potential therapy animals to her husband's facility." Michael Chen's legal mind immediately grasped the implications. "This is corruption, plain and simple. We can file for an emergency injunction based on conflict of interest and demand Max's immediate release." Sarah felt hope surge through her exhausted body for the first time in days. "Can we get him back today?" "Better than that," Michael replied. already reaching for his phone. "We can destroy Foster's credibility and potentially get her fired." When hospital boards learn that an administrator has been sabotaging therapy programs for personal profit, heads roll quickly. The emergency legal filing was submitted at 1:15 p.m., just as Robert's condition took another dangerous turn. Doctor. Warren had been monitoring his declining vital signs with growing alarm, noting that each day without Max brought increasingly severe symptoms that medication couldn't control. "His body is essentially going through withdrawal," she explained to Sarah and Tommy as they watched Robert's latest blood pressure readings. Max's presence regulated his stress hormones so effectively that removing the dog created a physiological crisis. Tommy held his grandfather's hand, feeling the tremor that had developed since Max's departure. "Grandpa, hold on. We're getting Max back, I promise." But Robert's response was barely audible, his stroke-affected speech making words difficult to understand. "Too late. My fault. Failed him like the others." The reference to the others triggered a memory that sent chills down Sarah's spine. In her father's bedroom closet, she'd found a box of military photographs showing Robert with 3 German shepherds in Vietnam. The inscription on the back read, "Sergeant, Bruno, and Rex, KIA 1969, never forgotten." Understanding flooded through her as she realized that Max's forced removal had triggered Robert's deepest trauma, the guilt he'd carried for 50 years about the military dogs he'd been unable to save in Vietnam. To Robert, losing Max wasn't just about losing a pet. It was about failing another loyal companion who had trusted him completely. "Dad, listen to me," Sarah said urgently, gripping his hand. "Max isn't dead. He's not like the dogs in Vietnam. We're bringing him home." But Robert's eyes had taken on the distant look that Sarah recognized from her childhood, the expression he wore when the war memories became too vivid to bear. Dr. Warren's latest tests confirmed what everyone feared. Robert was slipping into a severe depressive episode that was accelerating his physical decline. The breakthrough came at 3:30 p.m. when Judge Patricia Williams, no relation to the hospital nurse, issued an emergency injunction ordering Max's immediate release and demanding a full investigation into Margaret Foster's conduct. The judge's order included scathing language about conflicts of interest and abuse of public trust. Michael Chen called Sarah with the news just as she was preparing to say what she feared might be her final goodbye to her father. "We won. Max will be released within the hour, and Foster has been suspended pending investigation." The race to collect Max and return him to the hospital became a community effort. Frank Kowalski volunteered to drive. Linda Chen provided medical support in case Max showed signs of stress, and Tommy insisted on coming along to help reunite his grandfather with his beloved companion. The animal control facility was a grim concrete building that smelled of disinfectant and despair. Max had been housed in a small kennel for 3 days, and the change in his appearance shocked everyone who saw him. The confident, purposeful dog who had stopped an ambulance now sat listlessly in the corner of his cage, his amber eyes dull with confusion and grief. "He hasn't eaten since he arrived," Officer Derek Murphy admitted as he unlocked the kennel. "It's like he's given up hope." But the moment Max saw Tommy, something sparked in those amber eyes. The dog rose slowly, his tail beginning a tentative wag as he recognized a familiar face. When Tommy knelt and opened his arms, Max collapsed against him with a whimper that sounded like pure relief. "It's okay, boy," Tommy whispered, burying his face in Max's thick coat. "We're taking you home to Grandpa." The drive back to Cincinnati General Hospital took 20 minutes, but for Max it seemed to stretch into eternity. The dog sat in the back seat beside Tommy, his entire body trembling with anticipation as he somehow understood that he was returning to his purpose, his person, his reason for being. Word of Max's release had spread through the hospital, and despite visiting hour restrictions, a crowd had gathered to witness the reunion. Dr. Warren had prepared Robert as much as possible, but the elderly veteran remained in a state of near catatonic depression that made everyone fear the reunion might come too late. Max's entrance into Robert's room was met with absolute silence. The dog approached the hospital bed slowly, carefully, as if afraid that his master might disappear again. Robert's eyes focused with difficulty, struggling to process what he was seeing. "Max?" The word came out as barely a whisper, but it carried 50 years of longing, grief, and hope. Max placed his head gently on the hospital bed, just close enough for Robert to touch. The old man's trembling hand found the familiar warmth of his companion's fur, and something fundamental shifted in his expression. The distant look of trauma began to fade, replaced by wonder and gratitude. "Good boy," Robert managed, his voice growing stronger with each word. "You came back. You came back to me." The medical monitors in the room began registering immediate changes. Robert's blood pressure dropped to normal ranges, his heart rate stabilized, and his stress hormone levels plummeted in a way that no medication had been able to achieve. Dr. Warren watched the transformation with professional amazement and personal satisfaction. "That's the most dramatic physiological improvement I've ever witnessed. Max's presence is literally healing your father." But the most significant change was in Robert's eyes, which had regained the clarity and purpose that had been missing since Max's removal. As he stroked his companion's head, Robert looked at his family with an expression of profound determination. "I need to tell you something," he said, his speech clearer than it had been since the stroke. "Max isn't just my dog. He's my partner, and I think it's time he got back to work." The statement would lead to a decision that would transform not just their family's future, but the entire approach to animal-assisted therapy at Cincinnati General Hospital. Robert Harrison was about to make a choice that would honor both his military service and Max's extraordinary abilities, creating a legacy that would touch countless lives in ways none of them could yet imagine. The reunion was complete, but the real story was just beginning. The decision that would define the rest of Robert Harrison's life came to him with startling clarity as he lay in his hospital bed, Max's warm presence beside him serving as both comfort and inspiration. For 3 days, he had wallowed in the familiar darkness of survivor's guilt, reliving the loss of his military dogs in Vietnam and believing he had failed Max just as he had failed Sergeant Bruno and Rex 50 years ago. But now, watching his family's faces as they celebrated Max's return, Robert understood that his story wasn't about failure. It was about second chances. The stroke that had nearly killed him had also brought him face to face with a truth he'd been avoiding since Martha's death. He still had something valuable to give to the world. "Sarah, Tommy," Robert said, his voice gaining strength with each word, "I need you to call Dr. Morrison. Tell him I want to volunteer for the Medical Alert program." Sarah's eyes widened with surprise and concern. "Dad, you're still recovering from a stroke." "Maybe we should focus on getting you well before making any major decisions." "I am well," Robert replied with a firmness that reminded everyone of the military officer he had once been. "For the first time in 3 years, I feel like I have a purpose again. Max saved my life, but I think maybe I can help him save others." Dr. Warren, who had been quietly observing the reunion from the doorway, stepped forward with genuine interest. "Mr. Harrison, what exactly are you proposing?" Robert's hand never stopped stroking Max's head as he outlined his vision. "Max is trained to detect medical emergencies before they happen. He could help other veterans, other elderly patients who live alone like I do. But he needs a handler who understands both his abilities and the people he's meant to serve. The proposal was audacious in its simplicity and profound in its implications. Robert wanted to become Max's official handler in a volunteer program that would bring medical alert services to high-risk patients throughout the Cincinnati area. The man who had spent decades hiding from his past was ready to embrace it in service of others. Tommy leaned forward, his teenage enthusiasm evident. "Grandpa, you mean like you and Max would be a team? Going to help other people?" "That's exactly what I mean. There are hundreds of veterans in this area living alone, dealing with PTSD, health problems, isolation. Max could help them the way he helped me, and I could help them understand what it means to have a partner who won't give up on you." Dr. Morrison arrived within an hour of receiving Sarah's call, his expression a mixture of professional excitement and personal amazement. The veterinary neurologist had spent months trying to restart his father's research program, but university bureaucracy and funding limitations had created seemingly insurmountable obstacles. "Mr. Harrison, what you're proposing could revolutionize how we approach medical alert services for at-risk populations," Dr. Morrison said, as he reviewed Robert's medical charts. "But the program would require extensive coordination with hospitals, insurance companies, and social services agencies." "Then let's coordinate," Robert replied with the determination that had carried him through a war and 50 years of survival. "I've got time, I've got experience, and I've got the best partner in the world." The logistics were daunting. Robert would need to complete certification as a service animal handler. Max would require updated medical clearances and behavioral evaluations, and the program would need official approval from multiple regulatory agencies. The process could take months and would require navigating the same bureaucratic maze that had nearly cost Max his life. But Margaret Foster's suspension had created an unexpected opportunity. Dr. Warren found herself appointed as interim administrator, and her first official act was to approve a pilot therapy animal program at Cincinnati General Hospital. Max would become the program's first official medical alert service animal, with Robert as his certified handler. "There's something poetic about this," Dr. Warren told the assembled family. "The dog who was nearly destroyed by bureaucracy becoming the foundation for a program that could help thousands of people." The training process began immediately, despite Robert's ongoing recovery from his stroke. Physical therapy sessions were restructured to include exercises that would improve his ability to work with Max in various settings. Speech therapy focused on commands and communication techniques that would be essential in emergency situations. Max seemed to understand that his role was expanding beyond caring for just one person. During training sessions, he demonstrated an ability to work with multiple handlers and to alert medical staff to potential emergencies among various patients. His success rate in detecting pre-symptomatic medical events was remarkable, nearly 90% accuracy in controlled conditions. The media attention that had initially threatened to destroy their family now became a powerful tool for promoting the program. Jennifer Martinez's investigative reporting had not only exposed Margaret Foster's corruption, but also highlighted the broader issue of veteran isolation and inadequate medical support for elderly Americans living alone. Donations began pouring in from across the country. Veterans organizations, animal welfare groups, and medical foundations contributed funding for equipment, training, and program expansion. The initial goal of serving the Cincinnati area grew into a vision of establishing medical alert teams in cities across Ohio and beyond. 3 months after his stroke, Robert stood in the lobby of Cincinnati General Hospital wearing an official volunteer badge and accompanied by Max, who wore a service animal vest emblazoned with Medical Alert Team. They were preparing for their first official call, a wellness check on Harold Kowalski, Frank's 78-year-old father who lived alone after his wife's death. "You ready for this, boy?" Robert asked, looking down at his partner with pride and affection. Max's response was to sit perfectly at attention, his amber eyes alert and focused on the task ahead. The transformation from the listless, depressed animal in the animal control kennel to this confident, purposeful working dog was nothing short of miraculous. Sarah watched her father prepare for his first official mission with emotions that ranged from pride to anxiety. The man who had barely survived a stroke was now volunteering to help others in similar situations, driven by a sense of purpose that seemed to have erased years of grief and isolation. "Dad, are you sure you're ready for this? It's only been 3 months since I got my life back," Robert interrupted gently. "Sarah, I spent 3 years after your mother died just waiting to join her. Max showed me that I still have work to do." The first call was routine. Harold Kowalski was fine, just experiencing minor medication side effects that Max detected early enough to prevent complications. But the significance of the moment wasn't lost on anyone involved. Robert and Max had officially begun their new career as a medical alert team, transforming personal tragedy into community service. Over the following months, their success stories multiplied. Max alerted to potential cardiac events in 17 different patients, detected 3 cases of undiagnosed diabetes, and identified medication interactions that could have proved fatal if left unaddressed. Each success validated Dr. Morrison's research and proved the value of human-animal partnerships in medical care. Robert's own health continued to improve as his sense of purpose strengthened. The depression that had plagued him since Martha's death lifted gradually, replaced by the satisfaction of meaningful work and the constant companionship of a partner who shared his dedication to service. Tommy, now a senior in high school, had been accepted to Ohio State University with plans to study veterinary medicine. His essay about Max's influence on his career choice had earned him a scholarship specifically designated for students interested in animal-assisted therapy research. The program's success attracted attention from the Department of Veterans Affairs, which began exploring ways to incorporate medical alert teams into their standard care protocols for at-risk veterans. Robert found himself testifying before congressional committees about the potential for expanding such programs nationwide. 1 year after his stroke, Robert Harrison stood before a gathering of 500 medical professionals, veterans advocates, and animal welfare specialists at the National Conference on Human-Animal Medical Partnerships. Max lay calmly at his feet as Robert delivered the keynote address about their journey from personal crisis to national recognition. "A year ago, I was a broken old man waiting to die," Robert told the audience. "Max didn't just save my life, he gave me a reason to live. But more importantly, he showed me that our greatest failures can become our greatest opportunities to serve others." The standing ovation lasted for several minutes, but Robert's attention was focused on Max, whose tail wagged with what looked like pride in their shared accomplishment. The dog, who had been scheduled for euthanization as surplus university property, had become the inspiration for a movement that was changing how America approached medical care for its most vulnerable citizens. Dr. Warren, now permanently appointed as administrator at Cincinnati General Hospital, announced during the conference that their pilot program had been so successful that the hospital was establishing the Robert Harrison Center for Medical Alert Services. The facility would train teams throughout the Midwest and serve as a research center for expanding human-animal medical partnerships. As the conference concluded and attendees gathered around Robert and Max for photographs and questions, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought their family from the brink of despair to this moment of triumph. Her father's transformation from isolated widower to national advocate proved that second chances could come at any age, often in the most unexpected forms. The final surprise came during the conference's closing ceremony when Dr. Morrison announced that Ohio State University was establishing the Morrison-Harrison Fellowship for Advanced Animal-Assisted Therapy Research, funded by the royalties from licensing Max's training protocols to medical facilities across the country. Sometimes, Dr. Morrison said as he presented Robert with the fellowship announcement, the greatest breakthroughs come not from laboratories, but from the simple bond between one man and one remarkable dog who refused to give up on each other. That evening, in the quiet of Robert's farmhouse where the whole story had begun, 3 generations of the Harrison family sat on the front porch watching the sunset. Max dozed peacefully at Robert's feet, his service animal vest hanging on a nearby chair, while the sounds of rural Ohio provided a gentle soundtrack to their contentment. "Grandpa," Tommy said quietly, "do you ever think about what would have happened if Max hadn't found you that day in the storm?" Robert considered the question as he stroked Max's graying muzzle. The dog was showing his age after years of intensive service, but his dedication remained unwavering. "I think Max and I were always meant to find each other, Tommy. Sometimes the universe has plans that are bigger than our understanding." Sarah, who had long since abandoned any thoughts of nursing homes or institutional care, smiled as she watched her father's obvious contentment. The financial pressures that had once seemed overwhelming had been resolved through the program's success, but more importantly, the family had been strengthened by their shared commitment to Max's mission. "What's next for you two?" Sarah asked, knowing that retirement was probably not in either Robert's or Max's vocabulary. "Dr. Morrison wants us to help establish programs in Texas and Florida," Robert replied. "Lots of veterans down there who could use what we've learned." Max's tail thumped against the porch boards, as if he understood and approved of the plan to expand their mission. At 7 years old, he was entering his senior years for a working dog, but his enthusiasm for his life-saving work showed no signs of diminishing. As darkness settled over the farmhouse and the family prepared to head inside, Robert paused for one last look at the spot where Max had first appeared during that winter storm 3 years ago. The transformation that had begun with one lost dog finding one lonely man had grown into something neither of them could have imagined. The dog who had refused to let an ambulance pass had indeed shattered reality, not through supernatural abilities, but through the simple power of unwavering loyalty and the human capacity to transform personal pain into purposeful service. In saving Robert Harrison's life, Max had found his own purpose, and together they had discovered that the greatest miracles often begin with the smallest acts of faithfulness. Their story had become a testament to the idea that second chances can come at any age, that purpose can be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the greatest love is expressed not through words, but through the simple act of refusing to abandon those who need us most. Fellow Americans over 55, this story touches the heart of what many of us know too well: the fear of becoming invisible, forgotten, or seen as a burden in our golden years. Robert's journey from isolation to purpose proves that our greatest contributions often come not in spite of our struggles, but because of them. His partnership with Max reminds us that loyalty, service, and second chances don't have expiration dates. Sometimes our most profound purpose emerges exactly when we think our useful years are behind us. Have you ever experienced a moment when an unexpected companion, human or animal, changed the trajectory of your life? What would you do if you had the chance to turn your personal struggles into a way to serve others in your community?